After the Japanese evacuation of Guadalcanal and their disastrous defeat at the Bismarck Sea, we had entered into a period of tense expectation in the South Pacific, in which both the Allies and the Japanese Empire analysed and discussed what their next plans would be. The former in regards to Operation Cartwheel, the neutralization of Rabaul, and the latter in regards to the defense of their remaining gains in the South Pacific. Today, that calmness will finally be broken, as Admiral Halsey and General MacArthur set out to carry out 3 naval landings at the same time: Nassau Bay, the Kiriwina and Woodlark Islands, and New Georgia, the bulwark of the Central Solomons. Thus, join us as we delve into the start of these important offensives in another exciting episode of the Pacific War. Nobody likes sponsors cutting into the video's flow, but a channel like ours can't survive without sponsors. At some point, we'd like to stop relying on the sponsors and present our videos sponsor-free to everyone. To do that, we need at least 10,000 YouTube channel members and patrons. Your kind support is always appreciated. We would not be able to create so many videos without you. Channel members and patrons get weekly exclusive videos, like our finished series on the Peloponnesian War, and the ongoing series on the Italian Wars of Unification, Risorgimento, as well as the Anabasis of Xenophon and the history of Prussia, as well as many interesting non-serialized videos. Our supporters also get our schedule, early access to the videos, access to our exclusive Discord, and much more. Thank you for supporting us. As we last saw in our previous episode, the plans were already laid down for the simultaneous naval landings at New Georgia, the Kiriwina and Woodlark Islands, and Nassau Bay. In General MacArthur's Southwest Pacific area, Colonel McKechnie's 162nd Regiment continued to prepare for its Nassau Bay landings. Since early April, its inexperienced 1st Battalion had been carrying out intensive amphibious operations training at Morobe Harbour. Yet to be certain of their success, they were later reinforced with a company of the Papuan Infantry Battalion and with Brigadier General William Heavy's 2nd Engineer Amphibian Brigade, which would handle all transport craft. The McKechnie originally planned to have a staging base for the landings at Lasanga Island. After the summit conference, he decided to change to Maregi Point, an excellent sandy beach 12 miles north of Morobe, with good cover for troops and ample hideouts for landing craft among the mangrove-lined inlets. The McKechnie force would be carried in 2 LCMs, 2 captured Japanese barges, and 29 LCPVs, also known as Higgins boats. To further augment the landing craft, 4 PT boats were assigned to transport McKechnie's remaining 150 men from Morobe. In the meantime, Brigadier Motten planned to send Captain Dexter's D Company, Victors of Lababia Ridge, to Napier, tasked with marching to the mouth of the Bitoy River to divert Japanese attention from Nassau Bay. Additionally, one of its platoons, under Lieutenant Dave Burke, was to guide the Americans to the landing beach with 2 red lights, 600 yards from one another with a white light in the center. Meanwhile, we'll recall that Operation Chronicle was expected not to be contested, so General Kruger decided to divide his forces into 2 regimental groups, with Colonel Cunningham's 112th Cavalry Regiment being earmarked to occupy Woodlark, while Colonel Herndon's 158th Regiment was to take Kiriwina. They would be transported to their respective objectives by Admiral Barby's 7th Amphibious Force, which would in turn be covered by the meagre forces of Admiral Carpenter's 7th Fleet. On June 20th, General Kruger set up Alamo Force headquarters at Milner Bay, where he was joined by MacArthur and Barby. As a preliminary to the operation, Kruger further planned to send advance parties of its regimental groups to secure a beachhead on the 2 islands. Thus, on June 21st, the destroyer transports Brooks and Humphreys weighed anchor from Townsville, carrying an advance party of the 112th Cavalry Regiment to Woodlark. They arrived in the dead of night on June 22nd, successfully discharging 200 troops at Guasopa without incident, and then steamed back to Milner Bay shortly after midnight, from where they would take a similar advance party of the 158th Regiment to Kiriwina. Arriving at midnight on June 24th, the troops successfully landed near Losuia, yet unloading would prove slow due to their inexperience. so the ships would not be emptied before daylight came. Under the threat of air attack, the ships were then forced to depart partially loaded, though they would return 3 nights later to finish the job. On June 25th, Operation Chronicle was finally set in motion, as the destroyers Mugford and Helm began to escort half of the Woodlark force north from Townsville. Destroyers Bagley and Henley followed the next day with a similar force, with both echelons being expected to arrive on June 30th. Moving to the Solomons, we'll recall that Admiral Halsey's planned infiltration of New Georgia called for 5 separate landings scattered around the island, 4 of them being scheduled for June 30th. As a preliminary, Halsey also planned to land a number of reconnaissance teams on these objectives. The first one arrived at Segi on June 14th to work on the landing sites for their heavy equipment, and soon more would follow, tasked with manning beacon lights to guide in the landing craft. Yet on June 16th, a difficult situation developed at Segi, as a dozen scouts under the Coast Watcher Donald Kennedy unsuccessfully ambushed a Japanese patrol without killing anyone. This prompted a swift response from Colonel Sasaki, so Japanese activity in the Segi Point Viru Harbor area would increase as a result. Though it was feared that this could force Kennedy to vacate Segi, no action was taken until June 20th, when Kennedy erroneously reported that the Japanese had landed troops in Nono Lagoon. That night, Admiral Turner thus reacted by sending immediately 2 companies of Colonel Curran's 4th Raiders to occupy Segi, with 2 companies of the 103rd Regiment following them the next evening. The successful arrival of Curran's forces meant that Kennedy and the airfield site at Segi had been saved, yet it also alerted the Japanese to the incoming offensive, as the Allied destroyer transports had been sighted by lookouts at Wickham. Based on this information, Admiral Kasaka decided to put Southeast Fleet on high alert, but reconnaissance planes soon reported no unusual activity between Getukai and Rendova, so the alert was luckily cancelled on June 27th, a decision that was influenced by the fact that Kasaka and most IJN officers believed that the enemy invasion would not come until late July or early August. Only Sasaki had reached the conclusion that it would probably come in late June, so he had set out to improve New Georgia's defences in the little time he had. Though facing many obstacles, Sasaki would resourcefully manage to construct gun emplacements at Bairoko by using blocks of coral to establish a main line east of the airfield running inland from Ilangana, which made excellent use of low ridges that ran in all directions, and to build extremely strong bunkers to face a frontal attack across the Munda Bar. Yet communications would remain a major problem, and company-size units would be kept in exposed locations at Wickham Anchorage, Viru Harbour and Rendova Harbour, which could have been better used at Enogai, Bairoko and Ilangana. By June 29th, as Allied preparations for the 3 simultaneous amphibious operations had been completed, D-Day was finally set in motion. To support the landings, the Allied commanders had also prepared their air and naval forces to strike at the Japanese, in an effort to soften their defences and prevent quick enemy reinforcements. Thus, on the night of June 29th, General Kenny's 5th Air Force was to launch a heavy raid against Rabaul, while Admiral Merrill's cruisers took some mine layers up to the Shortland Islands to mine the southern entrance to Buin, and to bombard Balali, Faisi and the Poparang Islands. On the way up, 2 of his destroyers were also to give Villa a brief shelling. Finally, in the early hours of June 30th, 27 bombers were sent to strike Kahili, with more air attacks being scheduled throughout the day against Munda and Villa. Yet the night of June 29th would be dark and stormy, preventing the scheduled missions of air souls and the 5th Air Force, and forcing Merrill's vessels to carry out the bombardment and mine-laying in the driving rain with very low visibility. Nonetheless, Admirals Turner and Fort would depart from their respective bases to land at their objectives. Additionally, 2 groups of infantry, dubbed the Barracudas, would go ahead of Turner in fast transports, one to seize the Rendova Harbour beaches, and the other the Honiavasa Passage, through which the 43rd Division would stage to New Georgia. Looking west, Colonel McKechnie had moved most of his forces up the coast to McGarry Point by June 28th. That night, he also decided to send 3 small detachments to the Bateru, Lazanga and Flygon Islands to flash signal lights each night from June 29th until July 5th to guide the landing craft and supply boats. Japanese strength in the area consisted of the weakened 3rd Battalion 102nd Regiment, with its main base at Camp Dinga with a secondary position at the mouth of the Bitoy River. On the night of June 27th, Captain Dexter started his march east from Napier, stealthily moving by night through the exposed Bitoy track, and finally digging in at the last spur by June 28th. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Burke's beach party had departed Napier on the night of June 26th, tenaciously arriving at Tabali Creek by June 29th. That same day, the Papuan Company left Busso in canoes and arrived at Cape Roon, whence they moved overland to Sachen Bay in preparation for a diversionary attack on Cape Dinga. At the same time, Dexter began to probe the Japanese positions around the Bitoy with the support of air attacks. At dusk on June 29th, under a heavy rain, 3 PT boats carrying 150 men finally departed Morobe to rendezvous with McKechnie's forces at Megeri. The landing force was divided into 3 waves, each accompanied by one of the PT boats, which would also act as a guide in the dark night. The boats moved off in twos with an interval of 20 minutes between waves, unfortunately finding a discomforting heavy swell at open sea. The first 2 waves successfully met with their PT boats, yet the third failed to do so, so it would have to proceed without a guide and would finally sail beyond the landing beach. Around there, Burke's patrol was also fighting against the jungle, the rain, and time itself. But despite these delays, the Australians would finally reach the beach at 23:15, only 30 minutes before the scheduled landing time. However, they had emerged at a point too far to the south, but with no time to think about it, they set up a red signal light on a high point of sand, and another to the north of it, and signalled out to sea with a yellow light between. Around 0:15 on June 30th, the first wave of 12 landing craft approached the beach in line abreast and would then hit the beach in the high surf. All but 2 of the landing craft in the first wave foundered, their crews joining the infantrymen on the shore. Thus, the second wave had no choice but to land further down the beach, as the broached craft of the first wave blocked the designated landing spot. At full throttle, the boats hit the beach, the men tumbling out into the water, carting rolls of wire with them up through the surf onto the beach. This second wave also broached, leaving a total of 23 grounded landing craft along the beach. Finally, the third wave would be turned back towards Morobe, a fortunate fate since these boats would be the only transport available in the coming days. Furthermore, the 3 PT boats would also fail to unload due to the loss of most of the landing craft, only landing McKechnie himself and 6 of his staff. The first landing of General Heavy's 2nd Engineer Amphibian Brigade had been a disaster, mitigated only by the fact that no men had drowned, yet around 770 men had been landed under one of the heaviest rains this country had ever seen. Upon landing, McKechnie would immediately direct Companies A and C to secure a perimeter around the beachhead, establishing defensive positions about 300 yards to the north and south. Patrols would be sent further along the coast, arriving unopposed at Tabali Creek, but being engaged with machine gun fire at the mouth of the Bitoy. There, the Japanese had let the forward elements pass, then shot up the group at the rear, forcing A Company to fall back to reorganize. At 10, as the Japanese apparently moved to encircle the beach defense, McKechnie sent Burke's party and the bulk of C Company to reinforce the northern position, eventually forcing the Japanese to withdraw. The southern position, however, had been left vulnerable, only manned by a C Company platoon. Thus, the Japanese attacked from Cape Dinga with their characteristic bayonet charges, rapidly forcing the Americans to retreat further up the beach. Luckily, men from the amphibian engineers joined in on the defense, and finally managed to repel the Japanese attacks by nightfall. In the meantime, Admiral Turner's convoys continued to sail towards New Georgia in the early hours of June 30th without facing any difficulties, finally reaching its jumping-off point by early morning. The Barracuda groups had arrived there by 0225, successfully landing the 1st Infantry Group at the Honiavasa, Barilulu and Sasaveli Islands to secure them as a staging base, though the destroyer Zane would run hard aground due to poor visibility. The Rendova group, however, missed the flashing light marking the narrow Renard entrance to the harbour, and would ultimately land in disorder alongside the 1st Battalion 172nd Regiment. By 0600, the main landing in Rendova had begun, albeit in a hurried fashion. Nevertheless, under sporadic sniper fire from a Japanese force of 140 men, the beach would be successfully secured, while General Hester's 2nd Battalion, 172nd Regiment, established a defensive perimeter around the beachhead, experiencing some trouble digging in due to the heavily waterlogged ground. Outnumbered and taken by surprise, the Japanese defenders would eventually start to be pushed inland, suffering many casualties, and finally scattering in an effort to make it to the mainland on makeshift rafts. Yet their efforts would be in vain, as they would be ultimately captured by the American patrols and vessels. The Japanese at Baanga also attempted to interfere with the unloading at Rendova by opening fire with their 12cm guns on the westward destroyers, successfully hitting Gwyn. Nonetheless, the destroyers Fahrenholt and Buchanan would engage the shore batteries, while the damaged Gwyn obscured the transports with smoke, thus neutralizing the Japanese artillery. With his beachhead at Rendova secured, General Hester would then begin to bring the bulk of his forces to the island, while the Seabees started building a naval and artillery base there. Though alarmed by the Nassau Bay landings, Admiral Kosaka and General Imamura were shocked to learn at 0650 that Turner's destroyer screen was off Rendova. In response, 27 Zeros from Kihili were sent to disrupt the landings, though they would be intercepted above Rendova by 16 Corsairs and 16 Wildcats, losing 4 Zeros in the ensuing engagement. Despite these delays, the unloading went at a satisfactory pace, even though the marshy terrain made it difficult. A few minutes before 1500, most of Turner's excessive gear had been unloaded, and his vessels started to prepare for their withdrawal. Yet at 1545, a Japanese strike consisting of 26 G4Ms and 24 Zeros attacked the convoy. After circling over the Roviana Islands, the Japanese dropped to bear in on the convoy from the port side, suddenly getting intercepted by the Allied fighters. For the loss of 10 Zeros and 19 Bettys, the Japanese managed to score a critical torpedo hit on Admiral Turner's flagship, the transport Macaulay. Luckily, Turner survived and transferred to a destroyer, though the doomed transport would finally sink during the night. At 1720, 21 Zeros and 9 D3As would launch the last air attack in a chaotic manner, losing 7 Zeros and 1 Val without achieving any gain. At the end of the day, Air Souls had destroyed 1/4 of Kosaka's air strength, while losing only 17 fighters. So heavy were his losses that Kosaka would have to ask Imamura to commit the 6th Air Division in the future. Looking east, Admiral Fort also set out to make his 3 naval landings. In the Wickham anchorage area, Fort planned to land 2 companies of the 4th Raiders and Lieutenant Colonel Lester Brown's 2nd Battalion, 103rd Regiment, on a 500-yard strip of beach at Oloana Bay. The 4th Raiders were to go first in destroyer transports, but in a series of mishaps due to the bad weather, 6 Higgins boats were wrecked, the Raiders were scattered all over the area, and 1 platoon got stranded on a reef. Brown's LCIs, meanwhile, had no difficulty in finding the well-marked beach, so the troops could land with no problem. After reuniting with the scattered Raiders, Brown learned that the main enemy base was at Kiruku village, with a secondary camp at Vura. In response, Brown sent Company E to deal with Vura, while the bulk of his forces set out for Kiruku along a scout trail inland. While the Americans advanced slowly due to the driving rain and swollen streams, Colonel Sasaki sent an order to the Japanese at Wickham to withdraw around the northern coast of New Georgia. Yet the Japanese were in no position to retreat, as their barges were scattered in the Marovo Lagoon. Shortly after midday, Brown's attack began, as the Americans fell on the unsuspecting Japanese from the north side of the Kairuku River. By nightfall, the Japanese had been pressed back to Seke Point, where their artillery was, and their position at Vura was also scattered by E Company. The next day, under artillery fire, Brown would call for air and naval support for a final attack against Seke. Yet he would have to wait until July 3rd, therefore allowing most of the enemy forces to withdraw. On that day, some destroyers finally shelled Seke Point, with 18 SBDs dropping bombs there as well. When Brown's troops went in, they killed 7 dazed Japanese and captured another. The raiders then searched Gatakai Island, but the Japanese lookouts were also gone. In the meantime, the preemptive capture of Segi had caused a change of plans in regard to Viru Harbour. Thus, on the morning of June 28th, Colonel Kirin was ordered to send one company by rubber boat up the Choi River at the western end of Nono Lagoon. From there, the raiders would go overland and attack the Japanese bivouacs at Tombay and Tetamara, where they would be joined by a company of the 103rd Regiment. Instead, however, Kirin left Segi with his 2 companies on June 27th, successfully landing at a village just west of Nono the next morning. Setting out by land on a mangrove swamp, he would fail to arrive at his objective by June 30th, only getting to advance a little further from the Choi River as they started to meet the first Japanese patrols. Early on June 30th, Fort's destroyers entered Viru Harbour, expecting to find Kirin's raiders, but they instead came under fire from a Japanese 3-inch field gun at Tetamara, which prompted the destroyers to hastily withdraw from the harbour, finally landing its company at Segi to join the raiders overland. During the morning, Kirin also split his forces, sending 2 platoons to attack Tombay, while the rest set out to circle west of the harbour, cross the Mango River, and attack Tetamara from the southwest. Marching over a deep and impassable swamp, the raiders would have to keep on advancing during the night with the use of tree light, chunks of decaying phosphorescent bark that gave off a luminous glow. By July 1st, as Kirin prepared to attack, Sasaki also decided to order the forces at Viru to withdraw overland towards Munda. Around 0845, however, the outpost at Tombay would be rapidly overwhelmed, and by 0900, 17 SBDs would drop bombs over Tetamara, completely disrupting the Japanese artillery positions. An hour later, the Japanese began to fire against the raiders, but Kirin fiercely pushed on, encountering heavy machine gun fire on both flanks after 1100. Each machine gun position had to be destroyed, and it was here that the raiders suffered most of their casualties. At 1600, Kirin launched his final attack, and 30 minutes later, Tetamara was occupied. Nonetheless, some 160 Japanese soldiers would manage to escape into the jungles to join the defenders at Munda. Though he found unexpected resistance, Fort's eastern landings had been a success, capturing all 3 of his objectives. Segi's airstrip in particular would prove invaluable, as aircraft could be based there to fight in the Solomons area. Yet neither Wickham Anchorage nor Viru proved to be of any use in the future, and the landings also deprived Admiral Turner from employing the 4th Raiders against Rice Anchorage, so the effect of the eastern landings is considered mixed. In the southwest Pacific area, meanwhile, Woodlark Force had already departed Townsville on June 25th, moving slowly and stealthily to prevent drawing unnecessary attention, and by June 29th, they were beginning to arrive at the Solomon Sea. On that same day, screened by Admiral Barby's destroyers, the 2,250 troops of Kiriwina Force would depart Milner Bay, successfully landing unopposed near Losuia at dawn on June 30th. At night, Colonel Cunningham would also start his landing on Woodlark, facing no opposition as well, and rapidly completing the unloading. But Kiriwina, surrounded by a spiny necklace of coral, proved more troublesome, so the unloading would drag on discouragingly, and a fortnight would be required to unsnarl all tangles. Luckily, distracted by the landings at New Georgia and Nassau Bay, the Japanese would only respond by sending a total of 2 small bombing attacks, which caused little damage. Thus, in the next 3 weeks, Barby's 7th Amphibious Force would bring almost 16,000 men into Woodlark and Kiriwina without the loss of a single man, ship or boat. The Seabees would then successfully build an airstrip on Woodlark, though Kiriwina would again prove more difficult because of its terrain. The completion of the bases, however, would happen at a time when they would not be that useful anymore. Nonetheless, the bloodless operation had been a great success as an amphibious experiment for the Southwest Pacific area, and the Allies had managed to carry out a total of 7 naval landings under the noses of the Japanese. But that is it for this week. This has been a very lengthy episode covering the 3 simultaneous operations that happened on June 30th, and next week we'll return to Nassau Bay and New Georgia to cover the continuation of these battles. If you don't want to miss that episode, subscribe and press the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.